Hello and welcome to Kickback Science Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Luke. This podcast is your place to get the tools and knowledge necessary to navigate the world of health and wellness. So kick back, let's talk science. This is good content. This stuff has gone great. We'll jump into it. Let's dive in. Let's do a little science. I'm going nitty gritty science right now. I've been looking forward to this. Kind of going on a little bit of a tangent. Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. The information we discuss in this podcast is not meant to be taken as medical advice. It is simply informative. We're not affiliated with any organization or institution, just a few guys talking science and having fun. All right. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Kickback Science. We have a very special guest with us today, Coach Austin Witt. So Austin, he's tuning in from Colorado. He's a healthcare practitioner in a lot of ways. He's kind of got quite a bit of hats he wears in terms of he has extensive training as an exercise physiologist, started out doing clinical training. And then, as we've talked about a million times in this podcast, there's a lot of issues with our healthcare system. So Austin stepped out and paved his own way in creating this community of how to live healthy and how to avoid disease. So Austin has worked with tons of people in achieving their goals and creating this platform just to make it easier for them. And we're here to learn all about that process and learn more about this community that you've created, Austin. So to get started, first off, thanks a ton for hopping on and tell us, how did you end up where you're at?
Thanks, Luke, for first having me. And you guys, the Kickback Science Podcast is legit. I love the most recent podcast with the GLP-1 conversation. So got to throw the plug in there. But yeah, guys. So my name's Coach Austin Witt. I actually went to grad school with Luke in his first of 3 rounds.
And I'm still going.
Yeah, he's still going. So I was a year behind Luke in the master's degree program at Minnesota State, and there I was actually considering going to med school while I was there. I was up in the air for me. My advisor from undergrad basically told me, she's like, why don't you just pursue a post-bachelor program and figure out what you want to do? And I had no idea. And so I thought going to get my master's was going to push me down the medical route, but I realized more and more, and I'll get into this in the next 5 years, but there are holes in our healthcare system, right? So I think of our healthcare system as a integrated system, from working with preventive medicine all the way to essentially reactive or emergency medicine. And so what I found was, in between that spectrum of medicine, was there's a lot of things that need to be added. And that's basically the summary. Otherwise, I could go down a full tangent, but I worked, like Luke said, in clinical exercise physiology. I interned at Mayo Clinic and then ended up working out here in Colorado Springs in the emergency room and also stress testing, then led me down to cardiac pulmonary rehab. Then I worked in fitness tech, working for a company called Future. And then, I landed here. So I have my own app where I help people get better, basically. So but we can dig into that more as we go. So that's the short version, but would love to talk more.
Heck yeah. Thanks for sharing. So yeah, we'll touch on all that stuff. Now, to start off, we're kind of at this time period. It's New Year's. Everyone's working on all these New Year's resolutions. And as somebody who's worked with how many people on just building habits and making sure that you can sustain this, I want to get into that because there's this problem. And as people who go to the gym regularly, you kind of know this time period of the health kick, when people start these New Year's resolutions and then 4 weeks later you see the gyms kind of clear out a little bit. And that's such an issue because it's it's so difficult to start a habit, especially like exercise. So I want to talk about, what strategies do you have to help people build a habit so that they can make it past New Year's and even still be at the gym that next New Year's?
Oh my gosh, the $1 million question, right? That we're trying to answer. Yeah, so I'll kind of get into this, but I think humans are very social creatures, right? So, you know, during the holiday season, um, we feel like a lot of great things, right? Like we're around family, we generally feel a lot of comfort foods, and unfortunately, after the holidays, what happens is there's either kind of two reactions from my experience working with people. One is a guilt-based reaction where you feel guilty. I ate all this food. I should go, just try to essentially come back to net zero, right?
Mhm.
It's almost like a guilt feeling. And then as that happens, what happens is like there's a post I made about January 17th being like the worst day for drop-offs in the United States statistically. But January 17th is like the worst day to drop off. So like you'll start to see like if you're at a gym or even like if you're a coach and you're working with someone and you're like, why are they not showing up like after January 17th? That's usually wise. They feel this guilt shame cycle, and then what happens is they're just like, you know what, I give up. Like, because there's a lack of accountability in that moderation period, and they go into it for the wrong reasons. The other secondary option is for people who have been like, if you guys know the stages of change, the trans theoretical model of change. A lot of people are already contemplating this more before December, like even before like November, if you're in the United States before Thanksgiving, as people start to consider like, ah, man, I just, I've been trying to work out. I like thought about it. They start contemplating it. Then slowly as the marketing in, on the TV or radio or whatever, it's like new year, all the stuff. And your friends and family are starting to do this too. They start to get more involved and they're heavily motivated. Right. And so they go into the New Year's with like almost momentum where they're like, all right, let's do it. Let's execute. Let's get after it. But the problem is the same drop off problem is on January 17th because they didn't have an accountability in that period, essentially 16 days, they drop off. And so what we do is we are available on your phone or fitness at your fingertips, messaging you almost every single day as pretty much like once you wake up, you're going to get a message and be like, what's the plan today? I want to hear it from you. And they need to almost repeat it back to me. And so then we have like deep conversations and coaching conversations. But that is more important than anything is just knowing that there's someone on the other end just seeing you for where you're at that day. Because
Yeah.
as you know, Luke, like there's days where you're just like, God, I do not want to go work out today. Even like a person being like in the health and wellness industry, knowing all the, benefits of health and exercise and diet and all that stuff. But there's definitely days where you're like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Right.
Most
So
days.
yeah, exactly. But having someone else on the like literally messaging you on the other end, being like, there's a human being watching, not exactly what I'm doing, but like if am I showing up today for myself? And that showing up is different to each person. So we can talk about that though
Yeah.
more.
I I know a lot of people who have like signed up for personal trainers just for the accountability. Like people who know how to design a workout program for themselves because
Hmm.
of what you mentioned. I mean,
Hmm.
that
Yeah, I mean,
accountability is huge.
I completely agree. I've even hired several coaches for myself personally.
Hmm.
Like I think this is me being a coach and biased, but but every coach needs a coach or
Yeah,
like having someone to hold you accountable. And that doesn't necessarily mean like personal training, but whether it's like mental health or physical health, like having
sure.
someone who holds you accountable is important because it's better when you have support. Like we
Yeah.
know. So but yeah.
Dang, I should get myself a coach.
Yeah, I know a guy, I think.
I mean, I like, there's been a million times where I'm like, oh man, because like you just kind of need that external motivation
Oh yeah.
sometimes. But I've never actually pulled the trigger on it. That is a good idea.
I'll let you think about it. Contemplation.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I'm in the contemplation phase, but
Sure.
so like continuing on this habit building. Now, You're talking about January 17th, which I had no idea about. That's funny that that has been like statistically designated as the day of drop off.
Hmm.
But if we put that into context of, let's say it's not New Year's, let's say it's just randomly someone starts a health kick and approaches you, and you help them to try to form this habit.
Hmm.
Have you gotten feedback from some of the clients you're working with that, long term, let's say 3 to 6 months forward, like it's become easier for them to get into the gym? Like you said, a lot of days you don't want to work out.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, what kind of feedback have you gotten from your clients regarding that? If it's easier to sustain these habits?
Yeah. So one of the big things is, you know, talking about report cards as a way is what I call it. It's not a report card, it's a health data report that we do on essentially day 21. So right after 17
Yeah,
days, right? So this is the difference between us also versus other fitness apps and things along those lines is we look at data based on like wearable device data or like our app workouts. So like for example, like if you have like this, like your Apple Watch, or I have like a smart ring on, but we use any type of integration in for a lot of reasons. But one of them is like day 21, we can go look at all of this information, heart rate data, like all of this stuff, essentially lay it out for them so that they're like in a digestible way so that the client's like, wow, in 17 days or 20 days, I did all this stuff. We also have like immediate, like rewarding, like awards, like kind of like if you played video games in the past, like when you get like an Xbox achievement or something above, like
sure.
right? So we do that after every workout. If you're making personal bests, it shows it immediately. So I have that set up so that you're progressing versus
Hmm.
me telling you all the time. And but what I do is I can examine those 21 days and be like, okay, here's 21 days. How do you feel? Assess like some more like subjective like things. Like most people are kind of like, yeah, I'm starting to feel better. And that usually carries them into the next 30 days. But let's say it's 3 months from now, 90 days. We do a same analysis, but we look back on what does 90 days worth of progress look like. And so we use data to help make and drive decisions versus other apps and have a personal touch to it because like now you can get your Spotify Wrapped and all this stuff and you get all these numbers and all this data, but you're like, what the hell, like I don't know how to interpret any of this, and that's what we do for you. So think of like a financial advisor if they were to take like all of your spending habits and everything along those lines and be like, here's what you're doing, here's what you could do to make more money. That's what we do in health. It's the same concept, it's almost the same principle, to be honest with you. And it's an investment, right? So that's why, like, when I have to explain to people why should you hire a coach, I'm like, well, when you're dead, does it matter how much money you have?
Yeah.
So like it's an investment so that you can be there for your kids or grandkids or whatever. But that's why we want to make an impact and see the data in front of us versus just being like go to the doctor and be like, yeah, they told me to exercise and eat well, but I don't know what to do. And it's like, okay, well, we have a exact game plan of what to do. So,
Yeah. And then like after you've developed this habit and it's becoming easier for you to go to the gym, to eat healthy, you still have a way to track that and make sure that you stay consistent and don't fall back. That's awesome.
yeah,
Um,
thanks.
the howling you hear in the background is my dog yawning very aggressively.
He's like, why are we talking about
Yeah.
habits?
It's like, speaking of exercise, let's go for a walk.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so another aspect of like habit formation, my biggest problem with staying consistent is when something comes up that throws me out of routine. And and the biggest obstacle that I face is travel, vacations. So, we were out in Colorado for a while, and my brother's still living out there. We're actually going out next weekend to do some skiing, and we'll be out there
Ooh,
for a while. And
nice.
so it's like you go do these things that throw you out of your routine, and then you come back and try to get back into a rhythm. And that's what, I mean, for me personally sets me back all the time. And I know that that will resonate with a lot of the listeners. How
Mhm.
have you helped people handle those obstacles, whether it's, the holidays coming up or you're traveling, you're on vacation, or you get sick? Well, I guess sick is probably something very different than vacation, but how do you help people handle those?
Okay, so we kind of do like a three-step simple, it's a simple three-step process. So the first step is kind of like telling me your lifestyle. So this is one of the reasons just why we message so much. Like I get to know my clients like sometimes TMI, like like sometimes they overshare, but like for the most part they're just like here's my life and my schedule and this is how chaotic it is and tomorrow could be a different day and that's okay. Like I'm okay with that. We adapt so we can do workouts anywhere at any time. So whether it's at home or whether it's on vacation or whether it's at a gym or a specific gym. We customize workouts anywhere. And the best part about it is most of the people we work with travel all the time.
Hmm.
I actually work with several pilots, which if they're listening, holy shit, like your guys' schedule is just wild to me. I'm like, you like just crazy. But what we do is we establish like kind of like think of like dosing for like medication. We have a minimal effective dose of what we need to like hit each week. Um, and then we have a maximum. And so we look at it as when you are traveling and you have chaos in your life, like you have kids, or your kids are just awful this week, or they're great this week, whatever it may be, you need to manage that. There's a minimum that you have to hit when it comes to our goals. So for example, let's say you're on vacation, you're traveling to go skiing, and you're like, I don't have access to a gym, but I know I'm going to be skiing all day, right? Um, you're probably going to be getting a pretty good like amount of calories expended that we can track if we're wearing like wearable devices. Now they're not perfectly accurate, but because we've tracked your data for let's say 60 days prior to this, we have a good idea of what our minimum is required to hit this. Um, Also, if you're on vacation, and let's say your goal is fat loss or weight loss, um, we can typically what we can do is get a scale, not bring it with you on travel, but like let's say you have it like bought from like a Target or something like Travel Hack. You can buy a scale from Target or Walmart and then return it before you leave.
Oh, heck
And
yeah.
so yeah, and they don't question you about it. So what you can do is you can just get a scale to step on the scale while you're traveling if you're in a place for a long period of time. Now, obviously not everyone has that amount of vacation time. So what we do is we talk about what are the minimums you can do. Well, what you can do is get like portion control. You can monitor things like with hand-sized portions. You can get enough steps in. And then additionally, like since we have a barcode scanner and stuff, let's say you meal prep before you go, or you have food options wherever you're at, meaning like you have access to a grocery store and you can cook your own meals versus eating out every single meal, right? So we talk about travel strategies also beforehand so that people, whether they're traveling or not, or whether they have a crazy life or not, we can come up with solutions based on that. Because similar to like financial advising or coaching, right? Like your life doesn't stop when you're buying, donuts versus like investments, right?
Hmm.
Like, and so we want to be able to create flexibility and essentially like reduce the barrier to be like, yeah, my coach is messaging me today, but you could literally turn off the notifications, but in the back of your mind, you're like, I know what I need to hit, like
Yeah.
regardless if Austin messages me or not. So that usually helps. And like I said, having a minimum effective amount of these specific like goals allows it to be a little bit easier versus being perfect. Like you don't have to shoot for perfection. So that's where it averages out throughout the month versus just being like, oh man, I had one crazy week, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, it does. And in terms of like activity versus nutrition. So starting with like activity, you said you'll have a minimum and a maximum dose.
Mhm.
Um, and I assume that's based off of like estimated calorie expenditure that you're tracking that or with heart
Good
rate data.
question. Good question. So from just physical activity in general, we use steps as our
Okay,
number one
gotcha.
reference point. Um, like calorie expenditure is difficult, right? We know that that's like health data doesn't show us the greatest numbers, but it
Hmm.
gives us an estimate, right? So if you, let's say you're a listener and you have an Apple Watch versus a Garmin, like an Apple Watch, let's say you have a move goal that we shoot for, even though it's not perfect, like accurate, it does give you a number to consistently shoot for, and that still matters. Additional to your step goal, right? So let's say you have an Apple Watch, you're getting 8,000 steps a day, but I'm like, hey, let's hit our move goal of, let's say, 1,200 calories. That's expended. Well, you can do we can like put together a workout for you that you don't have to think about that. It just, you'll hit that goal, if
Sure.
that makes sense.
Yeah. And what is your minimum? Well, I think that that's going to be too broad of a question because everyone's going to have a different minimum. But what goes into like you telling a client, this is your minimum, this is your maximum? What kinds of things are you thinking about there?
So we never tell them a maximum. The reason why is because it's always going to change. But the minimum is typically based off of, like, we'll collect data for a full week of just what's their normal routine. They can do
Sure.
everything that they normally do and let life kind of just like at that moment, that past week, determine what is your minimum, right? So if your baseline is, I was stuck in a hospital bed, for 7 days, right? Like that's a different minimum than someone
Right.
who's going to be, all right, well, I barely go for a while. I barely, like, I work at an office job. I don't even get any steps in, right? That's your minimum, right? So when we start talking about progress, we work up for 21 days, kind of like we were talking about, like a progress report. We get up to a 21-day goal, and that's your new minimum. So, like in 21 days, you essentially set, which is a maximum at that time, a new minimum for the next 21 days, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So it just dosage titrates up eventually.
Gotcha. So when you go over your report card with at my parent teacher conference after a 21-day time period, if I'm
Exactly.
super lazy, then my minimum for that following 21 days is going to be a lot lower. Is that
It
what
could
you're
be,
saying at
yeah.
baseline?
It
And
could be,
then
yeah.
and
Yeah.
then you're progressing from there.
Yeah. Obviously, we don't want that to happen.
No.
But that's also why, like, every day in between, we're just like I said, like messaging you, like I'll, like, to hold each other accountable. I'll be like, yo, like, why, Luke, why are you missing work? Um, and I'm very honest on that. I tell people right away, I'm like, I'm not gonna like be mean about it and shame you, because like that's unfortunately like kind of the old personal training approach was like,
Mhm.
people would be like, oh, you missed a workout, like you're never gonna get it back, and all this kind of like just like mental like shame. And now it's like, okay, you missed a workout, but like let's talk about other strategies, right? Like let's be realistic.
Yeah.
And so instead of the shame cycle of like I said, going into the new year and being like, yeah, I'm gonna do this because I feel guilty of eating all this food and not exercising, and then I get into it and I feel awful and then I quit. Like it's gonna be like, okay, well, no, I'm realistically looking at it and having goals.
Yeah,
So
because I feel like so many people set these goals that are are difficult to achieve, like not unachievable, but then you run into like people that get a whole new pantry when they start a health kick and decide they're going to work out 7 days a week, and the reality is it's probably not feasible, and then you don't achieve that, and then you're like, well, and how depressing is that? And that's
oh
just going to
yeah,
mess with your motivation. But yeah, and you talking about like the old fashioned way of like, oh, come on, you're weak, could get into the
yeah,
gym, you missed a workout. Like, oh, that's not going to benefit anyone in that situation.
totally. Yeah. Could you
Yeah.
imagine like telling a patient if they missed their medication once and then shaming them? They would be, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like
Like, what
if
do you
they were
want to
on like,
die?
yeah, yeah, you feel like dying tomorrow?
Yeah.
Like that'd be awful.
It is funny because there's different types of providers. Like you'll hear from some patients that they want a provider who's going to be like that, and they're upfront about it. They're like, "Hey, you be hard on me so that I'll do this." And then some patients like, and but there's actually like specific providers that they know it too. They're like, "Yep, I'm just going to say up front, like you're going to die if you don't
Hmm.
quit this X, Y, and Z,
Right,
whatever." And yeah, so it probably depends on the individual too.
right. Yeah, and it probably is super. Like I think of like my cardiac rehab patients back like several years ago. Some were exactly like what you just said. Some were like it some come in and smelling like cigarettes, right? Like obviously they shouldn't be smoking if they have
Mhm.
heart disease, and it's probably put them in that boat. But them being like, oh, like I saw you smoke today, and then you're like kind of like, well, like I'm sorry that you decided to do that, right? They don't. Some of them don't want that. They were like, no, tell me that it's not okay.
Yep. Yeah.
So I understand that, but also like I said, we try to be realistic on their goals with like what their lifestyle looks like, right? So if you're going to the mountains and skiing, like you said, Luke, and we're tracking everything, like I have no problem like letting you do a lot of different things, like trying things out, actually, to be honest with you. When it comes to exercise or like let's say nutrition, where I'm like, you know what, go out to eat like X amount of days and let's see how it goes. Um, it's all figuring out like what works for their schedule and what's realistic. So
Yeah. Yeah. For me personally, what I've found, and um, when I go on these trips, this was a few years ago that I decided I'm gonna find a gym wherever I go, and I'm just gonna do a quick workout. And I did just on one of those trips. And then now it's like in my head, I know how easy that was for me to do. There's always gonna be somewhere. But yeah, like skiing's different. I don't feel all that guilty going skiing. But if I'm on a beach vacation, it's like, okay,
sure.
there's gonna be a gym there. I can easily do this, and I'm gonna notice like how great it feels and after I do that. And so
Oh,
doing it
totally.
once helped me do it in the future.
Yeah. It's kind of like the flossing ideology. Like people hate flossing. It's crazy. But one of the best advice, I'm like, just start with one tooth, like
Yeah.
each day and add each day. Like
Yeah.
if that's a habit that you want to start, like it gets you in the rhythm of things. Like creating a barrier so small also really helps is a recommendation that I say is like create something that feels like so easy that you're like, obviously I can do that.
Hmm.
Like getting up in the morning and saying, I'm gonna go floss my teeth and brush and do this perfect routine every single day, like that's unrealistic. But if you like start with your like, I can floss one tooth a day, you
Yeah.
know, that can at least help. But those are just like you said, like on vacation, oh, I can at least walk. Like, could you just walk to the gym?
Yep.
Like, and you're probably like, yeah. And then it like cascades where you're like, all right, like now I'm at the gym. I might as well do something while I'm
Hmm.
here, So that's also like I'll use like that's just like coaching tactics that like we'll use, but that's one of them. I'm like, what's the lowest barrier to entry for you for
Yep.
any of these? So
And then just start there. So
yeah.
you kind of touched on diet. I want to talk a little bit about that and what types of approaches you use and what your app provides, because the most common goal people have is often weight loss. And
Mhm.
we always say on this podcast, like, weight shouldn't be the outcome that you're looking for, because it's not always healthy to lose weight. It should be
Mhm.
fat loss, and
Mhm.
maintaining muscle. Sometimes losing weight is appropriate. But with this being such a common goal that people have, what kind of tools do you have to help people achieve fat loss specifically?
You came to the right place.
Good, good.
Yeah, you came to the right place. So one of the cool things about why we have our app is because we wanted, just like I just talked about with creating lower barrier to entry, is like having access to, like, let's say you're tracking meals, but you're like not barcode scanning, but you're like, let me take a picture of what I'm eating, and it sends it directly to me. And so from there, what I can do is I can say, hey, let's go over this in conversation after you get back from vacation. And that instantly makes the person go, wow, if I'm tracking all this food, like I have to be mindful of what I'm eating if I'm sending this to my coach. Now,
Hmm.
do I have to be perfect? No, but I'm going to send a picture, and usually we'll do some like education beforehand of like portion control and what, like how to use your, like there's a hand portion control guide that we give out. You can access it if you message us, but we'll send it to you. But
Yeah, that'd be
what
awesome.
happens is you can just utilize like using your hand as a portion control to like monitor these things. And then taking a picture of it is like a secondary action to that of being like, okay, I'm traveling. This is what I'm eating or drinking. Most people are probably drinking, which that's a whole nother conversation that we could talk about. But let's say they're eating, drinking there, but they're more mindful of it, right? So like regardless if they eat quote healthy, because health is subjective, right? But if they're eating quote healthy or not, like healthy versus not is not a good way to look at it. But they feel like they're like, I'm making these decisions, and that's kind of a reward system for them. And so from there, what we do is we have these nutrition conversations of like, hey, I just saw what you ate on vacation. Tell me what you think is beneficial and what's not. And usually we like to let the client understand like this, and it's a part of the education because we're not taught it in school, right? There's a whole nother thing about that. But like giving them the opportunity to be like, I can make better decisions here, here, and here. So that they are essentially telling themselves next time I'm going to do this. But our app does everything all on one platform. So like if they're looking for meal recommendations, quick guides, anything along those lines, like if they're in a rush and they're like, shit, I don't have any access to food, but I am at the airport and I know that this is the convenience store and this is what I can buy. Like, what do I get there? So we send options with that all in the app. And we have access for like a barcode scanner. We have access for meals, like pretty much everything all in one platform. And that's
Holy
what our
shit.
goal was when I keep saying we, but when I'm saying we as in myself and the clients that I've
Mhm.
worked with in the past. When I essentially asked them, I was like, what would you want if you were, you know, going on vacation or you're going to use a coach online versus in person? What makes a difference? And having access to meals, a barcode scanner, like live support and coaching, like with training, like all on one platform, like it's almost a no-brainer for them when they're like, yeah, this is like, why would I go to an in-person trainer anymore at that point? That's
Yeah.
where they get to. So and that's where we try to make it as easy as possible so that anyone could use it. Like my oldest client, I think right now, like is 75 years old that's using it. You gotta be a little tech savvy to start with it, but it's very simple. Like once you get the hang of it, but
Yeah. I mean, and how effortless too to like take care of all these aspects of your health. That's awesome. And so you're the sole coach through FitWave. Do you have any
yeah,
other coaches that are working for you?
nope, it's just me. Nope. So yeah, so it's just me. Eventually, I think at some point, if we somehow take off, we've done decent, but there are some goals that we are trying to hit within the next 5 years for sure. But if we have enough revenue that we can support coaches and pay them well, what depending on like their background and experience and all of this stuff, but pay them a living salary versus like what personal trainers make it like a traditional gym.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I would love to do that because like I just know the fitness industry is like one of the things is like people like a lot of people who are in the fitness industry who are young out of college, they leave right away because they don't get paid at all or they're
Hmm.
making straight commissions. Like and so we also like a vision for us like as our company grows is to be able to employ people, pay them a living salary, um, and make sure that they can live a healthy lifestyle as well and practice what they preach. So that's I know that's kind of like forward thinking and off subject, but
Well, I
that's
mean, you got a
definitely a
pretty
goal.
cool thing going here. And I mean, like, it's not just providing this area for people interested in this field to make a living wage and such, but this type of thing works. Like, like
Yeah,
the being able to have everything all in one like that, like that's awesome.
thanks. Yeah, it's I have to give a lot of kudos out to a lot of feedback from previous clients like who started from our company literally being like so like we started in 2020 um and literally doing like your traditional personal training like online with Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel being like here's your meal plan for the week here's your
Hmm.
like here's your training on like a on a Microsoft Excel sheet like that you're probably like never going to use or here's a PDF right like here's a fitness program
Yeah.
now it's like here's live updates here's like like I said, like you get a personal best at the gym. It's like at the end of the workout, it shows you like you did it. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's cool. Like we want that. We want it to be interactive and like a real experience based on reality versus just being like, we can guarantee results if you follow this meal plan.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So, um, it's in utilizing, I think wearable tech is like the fact that they have like, like not saying that people need this and I don't recommend it, but like the glucose monitors, right? Like
Hmm.
now we have like that was like the first transition I would say into like integrative medicine that's going to be continued to be used. So like that now we can track, there's like a company out there that tracks like your sweat if you're like a high performance athlete and you're
Hmm.
like an ultra endurance athlete and we want to track your rate of water loss, right? Like we can do that now. It's crazy. Like
Yeah. Yeah. Those sweat
um
patches are cool.
yeah, so like like fitness tech is definitely evolving, but when it comes to weight and fat loss, like we keep things simple, like for being realistic with your lifestyle. Like, for example, we have like our physique competitors, which are the most extreme athletes. Like, we use very similar principles in nature uh, for fat loss with those people as we do like most of our weight loss clients. But we know like now with GLP-1 drugs and like other forms of, assisted medications, like we can really impact people's lives at a more direct level, like hormonally as well, versus just being like, here's your meal plan, here's your fitness plan, that's going to get you results. Some people need it. Like some people are so insulin resistant, it's insane, but they haven't been to the doctor in so long, but they're like, I don't know what's happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a combination of preventive medicine and also having a physician that you're having conversations with. So like I was mentioning this to Luke before the podcast, but we also like look at individuals' labs with the doctor and like basically show them like here's like if a doctor was like, hey, like can I see what my patient is doing? Because they're not tracking that. But can I
Hmm.
see what my patient is doing? Yeah, boom, let's send it to them. Like let's send them your essential report card, of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So
Which that's going to be a game changer too, is like having that communication. I interviewed, Peter Brubaker out at Wake Forest, and he's a professor in cardiac rehab, and he was talking about how like how much he's pushing for just physical activity levels when people go in to see their doctor. Like, how easy
yeah,
is it for you just to get a, an understanding of somebody's like exercise capacity and how much that's going to help in terms of
totally,
guiding your treatment plan moving forward.
totally.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so awesome. Now, with like you're continuing to evolve based on just client feedback, that just shows how effective this can be. What are the biggest barriers you've noticed that your clients have to achieving their goals?
Man, such a good question. To be honest, I think it's in regard to their lifestyle being so chaotic sometimes that they decide essentially like they're not worthy enough for coaching. That sounds crazy. But those are barriers that like outside of our control that we can't do anything about. Like we talk about stress management, we give like resources and talk about all these things, but um, some people just are so overcommitted to other things in their lives that they literally like choose to not put themselves as a priority, and that's a hard switch to push for a lot of people when they're like, you know what, this takes precedence over what I do. And so we talk about like the airplane effect, like the oxygen mask, right? Like if an oxygen mask comes down while you're in flight or whatever, the instructions are to put the mask on yourself before helping others because you can help others more effectively, right? And so that's the one of the biggest barriers currently is, especially for individuals who I would say are middle to lower income, is literally just having like being stretched so thin that they cannot go to a gym or cannot exercise because they have so many commitments. And that's what our goal is to try to reduce the barrier of entry for cost for these individuals or clients long term so that more people have access to this because currently like middle class and our prices are not that expensive. We're actually much cheaper, much cheaper than like a private personal trainer. But if you think of like a personal trainer, like that's kind of like a luxury item if you think about it.
Mhm.
It's like having access to someone who's gonna make you feel better, improve that, and that's not integrated into our healthcare system, right? So we have to pay extra for that, which is mind blowing to me, right? It's like, oh, we want to have a healthier population, but we don't want to invest in this.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother like, you know, conversation. But to be able to like create opportunities for people that they can exercise, you know, at home with a low cost is eventually like what we're trying to do. But at this point right now, like that's our biggest barrier is getting more people who have the commitment to say like, hey, you know what? I'm going to put myself first and I'm going to do this because unfortunately people just like give up on themselves and it's kind of sad, but it could be due to a lot of reasons, but a lot of things that we see is a lot of socioeconomic status is causes a lot of stress, especially during the holiday season too, right?
Hmm.
So like when it comes into January 1st, that's where I always say like where you're at is are you willing to invest in yourself for 12 months at least? Like that's one of the first questions I have if a client comes to me. I'm like, what is it going to take for you to invest in yourself? And they're like, I want to commit 5 minutes a day. And you're like, cool. That's it. That's all I need. That's
Yeah.
all I need to know is that you're willing to do it because that's our biggest barrier right now is getting more people access to that because we are also a business we have to run at a price. And so that unfortunately for everyone isn't available yet, but eventually we want to work towards that. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. The like helping people get to the point where they're able to care for themselves. And then, I mean, I imagine the impact that that makes pretty quickly. Once you're able to care for yourself, you can better care for your relationships and just
totally.
everything falls into place. I always say when people have these issues that they're dealing with, whether it be, weight gain, stress, can't sleep, you name it, start with activity. Like,
Mm-hmm.
exercise. When you exercise, you sleep better. When you sleep better, you tend to eat better. When you eat better, you feel better. You're motivated. You're going to
Totally.
exercise again, and then you'll sleep better. And then you get in this like positive feedback, and it's great. But you talked about the barrier of, that unfortunately this is all out of pocket. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, before we wrap things up, what are your thoughts on how we can bridge this gap of when people go in and they see their physician and they're hoping to get all this information, but the reality is that's not within the training of the physician. And I guess what I'm asking is, what are your thoughts on integrating exercise or a wellness approach into medicine as opposed to just like pill pushing?
Mm-hmm. Oh man, another $1 million question. Luke's got all these good questions.
I'm just
Uh
waiting until someone, can solve this. So once we
yeah.
solve it, then
Yeah, I wish I could like give you the black and white answer.
I
And
know.
to be honest with you, like this is where same thing like we're talking about behavior change, right? Like at the end of the day, this is like the biggest conversation is habits, right? Any decision making that you have in regard to your lifestyle is comes down to basically like your environment, your history with how you feel about these things, all of the stuff. And so reducing the barrier to entry, like for people to be like, hey, you know what? I'm going to seek out a preventive health person, right? I'm going to seek out educating myself on this. Um, that requires time to give back. So when it comes to the medical system of like preventive medicine, I think what would be better involved is reducing barriers like cost or like yeah, and we're battling insurance at this point. But like when it comes to is like how could like a nonprofit program like a hospital, specifically a hospital administration, give, X amount of money to a specific area where you could have that. Because that's where like when it comes to businesses, from the little that I know with nonprofits, we're not a nonprofit, but they can allocate certain funds or at least like a trust towards a certain program. And so like having a wellness program where they have coaches online or in person or whatever it may be that's integrated with their healthcare system is a way that if it's no cost to that person, you almost you decrease the barrier to entry much more. And there are programs like Silver Sneakers that exist, right? So in cardiac pulmonary rehab, we had a program called Silver Sneakers, which a lot of YMCA's, if you guys are over the age of 65 and you are going to a YMCA, you may qualify. So this is for our older individuals who are listening, but go to a Silver Sneakers program. They'll cover you for no cost to exercise at their facility. But when it comes to more access to people, what does almost everybody have right now, Luke? It's a phone.
Yeah.
And so if we could somehow have partnerships with, like, for example, us, just throwing a plug out there, with like certain medical facilities, that is something that we're currently in the works with on with a small clinic here. But that reduces the barrier to entry to be like, let me just like scan this to go to an app store and get free exercise like with a coach immediately, right? Like that integrates our principles of like interpreting data, giving the data to like their provider so that they can see it, and it's a communication system, right? And so then it takes less stress off of the doctor or physician or whoever, and it allows the client to live a healthier lifestyle without being on as many medications. Like obviously if it's genetic based, like they'll need it, but like it'll be less medications, less money out of their pocket. They overall save money long term. It saves the hospital money potentially in certain areas. So that's where what I would say is, integrating more of a system within our apps or like our phones that are accessible to patients. And I know some healthcare systems do that, but they need to be better refined. Like they need to be kind of all encompassing, if that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense. I mean,
sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
No, that was a great answer. And I think it really gets at the big issue here is, I mean, there's an underlying problem of, physicians lack the training in exercise and nutrition and such. But there's also the problem is even if you did add the training, there's no time to go over. Like you need so much time, as you obviously know, like there's a lot of time that goes into each individual client, understanding individually, like how to approach their lifestyle. Physicians don't have time for that. But if you did have this, like the FitWave app and having all that information just auto-populating into their health chart so that you can see it and know that, there's a coach like you that's helping guide them through this process. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, I just to add on top of that real quick, I know there's a lot of apps out there and a lot of fitness apps specifically, but you know, having qualified professionals, like you just said, like on the back end is important too, right? Because like you said, with the training and stuff, like being able to sit down and be like, hey, like this might be happening, and they're having conversations with your doctor. Like, could you imagine that? Like if, let's say, look, you're treating this patient, and you're like, here's someone who is taking care of this from a preventive thing, so I don't have to, give this patient a higher dose of medication or potentially put them at risk for like cancer or something, right? Like you're going to be like, yeah, absolutely. Every single day I'll sign up for that. And then it takes, you said, like weight off your plate. Cause like, I think of our physicians' times with the patients, like my friend who works for, there's a company here in Colorado Springs. I'm not going to name the place because I don't want to throw her or the
Sure.
thing under the bus, but she tells me, she's a nurse practitioner, and she tells me all the time, she's like, our turnaround time is literally like, they have to come in. They have to tell me, like, I have to tell them, you have 15 minutes to tell me one problem, and then I'll see you next week. And it's like, that just hurts, like hearing that. It's like, wow, like I can see why patients are upset at like certain healthcare like providers, because they're like, I don't have any specialized care, and that's really tough to hear.
Yeah.
And it's not to the fault of the provider at
Right.
all. It's like the administration is just like, we have to churn out this much money, like, and so it's a business, but like at the end of the day, like you have to kind of consider that too when you're like, okay, when I'm hiring like a preventive health person, I'm also not, I'm also potentially reducing my wait time at the doctor's office. Because
Right.
we try to say, imagine yourself going to the doctor and be like, yeah, I'm like killing it. And
Yeah.
they're like, yeah, we know. And like, that's it. That's the end of the, like, and then you have like a more like friendly conversation versus being like, all right, let me educate you on this medication and why it's going to benefit you. Right. So, um, it's just a win-win for everyone, I think. But
Yeah. And that's exactly it. Then you're not going in with multiple problems. I mean, when we have patients come in who, they'll when you make an appointment, you list what you're there for, and we'll see it on our end of like,
Mhm.
oh, this problem, this problem, this problem, and you do have to tell them like, hey, we don't have time to get to all these. What's like number one on your
Yeah,
priority list? And then you'll have to come back. But if you're able to focus on preventative stuff, they're not going to be coming in with multiple problems. So, yeah, that's
totally.
huge.
Yeah, great questions, Luke. Maybe we can solve these together.
Yeah, I know. We'll solve all the world problems. What an awesome discussion. And we didn't even mention the fact that you're also a professional bodybuilder.
No,
And,
thank you.
I say that because I want to have you back on sometime and talk about that because that's a whole different world. We've got a lot of
Yeah.
listeners who absolutely love um, like hypertrophy training.
Okay.
We did an episode on that specifically,
I
just
did
how
see
to
that.
build
Yeah.
muscle
Yeah.
and got so many questions. And the world of bodybuilding is its own little thing.
That's pretty
Um,
cool.
Not to sidetrack us on that, but first of all, thank you so much for coming on. We will link to Coach Austin's social media page on the description of this podcast. Check out his app, FitWave. And Austin, where else can people find you?
You guys can reach me at fitwave.com, or if you want to send me a personalized text, this is the business phone number, FYI. I'm not giving out my personal number. It's 719-297-5482. But I get back to you right away. So if you go to the website, you can also message on there. It sends me a direct text as well. So just go to fitwave.com, check it out.
Awesome. And we'll link to your number as well.
Sweet.
Sweet. Well, thanks so much, Austin. This was an awesome conversation. I learned a ton.
Thank you, Luke. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I hope you guys get some great takeaways.
Thanks again for tuning in to the Kickback Science Podcast. We love talking science with all of you, and if you feel the same, you can support us by subscribing, hitting that like button, and giving us a follow on our social media pages. Don't forget, you can submit questions through our website and in the comments section of all our social media. Have a good one, everyone.